Okay, in Algebra 1 today, percent word problems is the topic. And let's take a look at example 1 here right away to start with. Copy it down. Pause this, copy it down. All right, in example 1, it says Sarah and Jim have 75 chickens. They want to give Hal 20% of them. How many chickens do they give Hal? And what we're looking at is the original total, right? So between Sarah and Jim, they have 75. So that's the original total that they have, and they're going to give Hal 20% of them. So let's create an equation. That's kind of the start of this. So 20% of, which means multiplication, 20% of 75 gives us how many we're going to give Hal, or we'll use the variable h. Now remember, when you work with percents, you got to change it to a decimal, and that's always 2 places to the left. All right, so I have 0.2 times 75 equals h. And to figure out, or to calculate how many chickens they're going to give Hal, then we're going to take the 75 times 0.2, and it looks like we have 15. So 15 chickens is how many they would give Hal. All right, let's take a look at example 2 now. Pause it and write that one down. Now in example 2, it says Jane and Faye have 32 bagels left. All right, so they end up with 32. They began with 160. All right, now I'm going to highlight a couple things, that the pieces of information that we really need to know. All right, so we end up with 32 bagels. They began with 160. Now it says, it's asking what percent of the original number remains. So how many remain? Well, 32 remain, right? So what percent, and these are very similar to our of what is problems. What percent of, now what's the original number of bagels? Because it's asking what percent of the original number remains. So what percent of the original number gives us the 32 that remains? So let's see, they're multiplying by 160. We're going to divide by 160 to get our percent. So you're going to take 32 and divide it by 160. And we get 0.2. But that's a decimal. We want a percent. So how do you change a decimal to a percent? Add a 0. It's always 2 places to the right. So 20% is our answer. Now let's just go back and see if this makes sense. If they began with 160 and they end up with 32, what percent of the original number remains? So 20% remains, right? Does 32 seem like maybe a small number out of the 160? And it is. So 20% of 160 gives us the 32 that remains. All right, last example. Copy this down. All right, now in example 3, it says Bo and Christy hide 600 raisins. This is 60% more than they hid last month. Now this is just this is a type of problem that's a little tricky here, so you really got to listen through on this. So this is 60% more than they hid last month. I'm going to highlight that. So they have 600 raisins. Right now, this is 60% than they had last month. How many raisins did they have last month? Well, let's see. 60% more than. So last month they had 100%, right? This is one of those problems here now where we got to think about more than the percent. So this is 60% more than last month. Let's see. Last month they had this certain amount of raisins, or they had 100%. Now 60% more than that gives us the percent of 160% then. So 160% of what total that they had last month, I'll use L, gives us the 600 they have now. The key part of this is knowing how you got the 160%, all right? So let's change the percent to a decimal. 2 places left. And then we ask ourselves how we're going to solve it. Let's say they're multiplying L by 1.6. We're going to divide by 1.6. So let's see, how many did they have last month? Okay, we'll take 600 divided by 1.6, and we get 375. Now let's see if this makes sense. First of all, we better get a number that's smaller than what they ended up with, right? Because they had so many raisins last month, they ended up with more this month, right? And so our 375 does make sense because it's a smaller number than what they ended up with right now. So 375 raisins that they had last month makes sense. 3 good examples. Again, the topic, percent word problems.